Hi, greetings everyone. My name is Dr. Alexandra Cornelius, and I am the director of the Center for Women and Gender Studies. Welcome to our program for today, War in Ukraine, Gender and Poetry, Part 1. I've been experiencing the war in Ukraine largely through the interpretation of my mother, who has been following the conflict since its inception. She said to me early on during the invasion that she wished she was a man so that she could go and fight with the Ukrainians. And since that time, she's been translating for me and bringing to life to me the images that she watches on a daily basis, including the most recent atrocities. Finding the language to kind of bring justice to, and also provide hope for sustained fighting of this conflict is part of what she feels is her duty to her children to keep us abreast of what's going on. So when Dr. Rebecca Friedman approached me about holding a forum in which we would feature the voices of women and talk about the ways in which this conflict has been gendered and try to make sure that we create space for people who identify as women to be able to articulate and express and sustain and inspire continued persistence in this fight. I really jumped at the opportunity to help support this effort. And so I turned to Dr. Rebecca Friedman, who will be introducing our wonderful panelists, including Dr. Ana Menendez, who will be moderating the event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that introduction. I'm Rebecca Friedman. I direct the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab here at FIU. And my story as to my inroads to this panel is I myself am trained as a modern Russian Soviet historian. And when the conflict and the war started, I wanted very much for our Public Humanities Lab to create a platform. And I reached out to my wonderful colleague, Ana Menendez, who I'm about to introduce, and she suggested poetry, I believe, as one way to think about and to invite poets to share with us their own experiences and their words, because of course poetry plays a particularly important role in this war and in that part of the world, I would argue, and everywhere in general. So without any further ado, I introduce to you Ana Menendez, who is an associate professor at FIU with joint appointments in English and the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab. She's a former journalist, columnist, and freelance photographer. She was a 2008-2009 Fulbright Scholar in Cairo. She's published 4 books of fiction, which are all beautiful and I highly recommend. That part's not in the formal bio. And her 5th book, The Apartment, also quite moving, very moving, will be out in spring 2023. And it's an honor to introduce you, Ana. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon. I'm Ana Menendez, and on behalf of my colleagues at the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab, as well as the Center for Women and Gender Studies, I'd like to welcome everyone to this afternoon's event. Thank you to Drs. Friedman and Cornelius for organizing these discussions, and to our manager, Enrique Rosell, for all you do. It's April, National Poetry Month in the US, and Eliot's Cruelest Month. In this cruelest season of war in Ukraine, we turn to the poets who breed lilacs out of the dead lands. I will introduce our 3 speakers in the order they will be reading, and I look forward to our conversation after. Please drop your questions in the Q&A by clicking your Q&A button, and we will try to get to all of them. This event includes closed captioning, which you can enable by clicking at the top of your screen. I'm going to read all of the bios first, and then the poets will read from their poetry in the order that I'm introducing them. We will begin with Lyudmyla Khersonska. She's the author of 2 books of poetry. A Russophone poet, she has spoken about Russia's war in Ukraine and read her poetry about the war many times on Radio Liberty and in other venues. Her poems have been translated into Ukrainian, Lithuanian, and German, and she has held poetry readings in Moscow, Kyiv, Lviv, Munich, and New York. Her latest book, Tlania Litsevaya, includes poetic reflections on Russian aggression in Ukraine. Khersonska lives in Odessa. Khersonska translates English language poets into Russian, including Vladimir Nabokov and Seamus Heaney. She is currently a poet in residence in Italy. Olga Livshin was raised in Odessa and Moscow and came to San Diego as a Jewish refugee with her parents. Her poetry and translations appear in Plowshares, Agni Online, the Kenyan Review Online, and Modern Poetry in Translation, among other journals, as well as anthologies including Words for War, New Poetry from Ukraine. She is the author of A Life Replaced, poems with translations from Anna Akhmatova and Vladimir Gandelsman. Livshin holds a PhD in Slavic languages and literatures and taught Russian language and culture at the university level for a decade. She currently teaches children 7 and up creative writing and international literature online from her studio, Livshin Literary. Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach emigrated from Ukraine as a Jewish refugee in 1993 when she was 6 years old. She is the author of 3 poetry collections, The Many Names for Mother, winner of the Wick Poetry Prize, finalist for the Jewish Book Award, Don't Touch the Bones, winner of the 2019 Idaho Poetry Prize, and 40 Weeks, forthcoming from Yes, Yes Books in 2023. Her poems appear in Poetry, Blackbird, American Poetry Review, and The Nation, among others. She holds an MFA from the University of Oregon and a PhD in Comparative Literature and Literary Theory from the University of Pennsylvania. She is the founder and host of Words Together, Worlds Apart, virtual poetry reading series born out of pandemic but meant to outlast it. She is currently the Murphy Visiting Fellow in Poetry at Hendrix College and lives in Little Rock, Arkansas with her 2 kids, cat, dog, and husband. Welcome to all of the poets. Thank you for your words this afternoon in this very difficult moment in your country's history. Welcome, Ludmila.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to read some poems, and I'm wondering if we have a Google Doc for our audience to behold for accessibility as well. There we go. It's in the chat. Thank you so much, Enrique. This is Ludmila's poem in my translation. Buried in a human neck, a bullet looks like an eye sewn in, an eye looking back at one's fate. Who shot him there? Who gave the order? Which man? Who will bury him? And what's the rate? When it comes to humanity, war is the beginning and end. Whoever attacks you, don't turn your back. Says the Lord, for my people are foolish. They have not known me. They are silly children, and they have no understanding. But the children feel as strong as their machinery, mass-produced, with plenty of seamstresses for repairing. Some ladies patch holes, others fix neck bones, still more sew on buttons that were torn away from hands. And the Lord says, they are wise in doing evil, but, says the Lord, they do not know how to do good. But the children, if they survive, say it was luck. And if they die, they think that was yesterday. Today is another day. And the seamstresses stand with a shroud, telling them, put this on. How long must we put up with the flags, the trumpets calling us into the fray? What beast has awakened? Where did our special forces land? Who shot that man in the back? Who gave the command? Who will bury him? And what's the rate?
Thank you, Olga. Now I will read this poem in Russian as it was written. Пуля в человеческой шее выглядит как вшитый глаз, как будто человек смотрит глазом из-за затылка своей судьбы. Кто стрелял в спину? Кто отдавал приказ? Кто будет хоронить и почем гробы? Все человеческое начинается и заканчивается войной. Кто бы ни наступал, не поворачивайся спиной. Говорит Господь, это от того, что народ мой глуп, не знает меня. Неразумные они дети, и нет смысла у них. А дети думают, что они крепки, как броня, что их массово шьют, и на всех хватит портних. Эти латают дыры, сшивают шейные позвонки, пришивают оторванные пуговицы от руки. А Господь говорит, они умны на зло, но говорит Господь, не умеют делать добра, они разумные дети. Если выживут, думают, повезло. А если умрут, думают, это было вчера, а сегодня уже другой день. И портнихи стоят с покрывалами, говорят, надень. Долго ли видеть знамя, слушать звуки трубы? Что за зверь пробудился? Кем воюет спецназ? Кто стрелял в спину? Кто отдавал приказ? Кто будет хоронить? И почему гробы?
I'm going to read a poem of my own, and this is called Translating a Life. And I wrote it after translating some of Lyudmyla's poems and poems by Boris Khersonsky, another tremendous poet, who is also Ludmila's life partner, and another poet for the anthology Words for War. And this poem is dedicated to the editors of Words for War, Oksana Maximchuk and Max Rosachinsky. Translating a Life. Someone spread a blanket of wild buckwheat over a meadow. Someone tucked puffball pillows in each corner of the purple-green sheet. It is summer everywhere, except war. War where it used to be home, and now war by government here. And what does it matter that the meadow seduces the bees in pollen, or me in lines of a poem, or that I hear perfectly good Russian names for plants and translate them into you and me-ish. Take the tea mushroom, the little fox mushrooms and piggies, the early field dweller, the mysterious cheese eater. These words are undocumented here, and the country that sent them erases every syllable with its crimes. Take an under birch mushroom anyway. It is a choice edible, birch bolete, in your tongue, on the tongue, the language for falling in love with forests and stories and friends, does not care who's killing whom. Unfortunately, I care. And sitting here by a huge flowering bush, I see no refuge. What languaged fantasy could stop us from being murderous strangers? Would you take a Russian mushroom name, tuck it in your lapel for the brief banquet of life? Does that translate anything else for you? Is this how it works?
Thank you, Olga. Do you, Ludmila or Olga have anything else they're going to read right now?
I think Julia is up next.
Okay, we move to Julia. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna read one poem that it's not the one I was planning on reading, but it's the one that I felt compelled that I had to read in light of all the footage that was released this weekend from Bucha. This is a poem that, you know, deals with my ancestral history at Babin Yar. There is no name for this. We watched for what felt like hours through the chain-linked fence, whose netting fit my son's entire arm, or just his lips and chin, his tongue stretched out to inhale, crushed bricks, wires, roots, someone's dead plant, mud, bones, pets, or rodents, maybe their owners. The excavator's overgrown arm scooped through grass and soil as easily as skin, making room for new construction that will tower at least 2 stories above most of the other houses on our block. Yama, pit, hole, ditch, trench, crag, crater, higher, my son asks, ravine, hollow, more, his fingers climb the fence. He is ecstatic, growing a grave. The man in the back hose cab tips his hat and smiles, waves as he thrusts the whole machine forward, its giant tires swallowing mud on the brink, thick legs anchored deep to fight the fall, the bluff where silt slips down soil walls, crumbling as easily as skin. And in my mouth, I taste the rust, the lines and lines and lines of bodies missing from this moment when my son's whole face is pressed against a fence ignited by the other side and all that lies below. Yeah. I, me, myself, mama, mammal, yama, he yells, mama, yama, they don't belong here. Ghosts, bones should have been left across the water. Blacker soil, not this, red mud, not deep enough, not past enough, not enough. This is not enough. Yama, mama, they don't belong. These sounds so close to llama, sharp and comic, comma, drama. I'm laughing, crying, gagging, trauma. He can't get enough of it. Yama. The word, it's earth, sick to my stomach. I tear his fingers loose from the dust and metal, and we walk through fresh puddles and debris. He found a string with 2 deflated green balloons. Yayas, he calls them. The sound as far from Sharik as this dugout is from Babin Yar, as he is from the ghosts he comes from, as this house is from the bones on which it sits.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Ludmila, for those powerful words, those powerful images. I hope we'll have time to read some more. I do want to make sure that we have times for questions from our audience, and I do want to have a discussion about poetry as well. Before we go on, I want to remind everyone that this is also a fundraiser, and 100% of the proceeds will go to UNICEF to help women and children in Ukraine. So please consider a small donation, $5, $10. Rebecca Friedman has dropped the link into the chat for everyone, including those of you who perhaps will see this on recording. As I was listening to you all, I thought about the great migrations of the 20th century that unfortunately continue into the 21st now. And I thought of my own great-grandparents. Here in Miami, we all come from somewhere else. We've all been the inheritors of people who have been on the move. And she left the Levant at age 14, 15 with a small baby in the company of her mother. And I've reflected often on how often it's the women who leave. And I wrote a poem in tribute to her not long ago where I noted that the men stay and fight and die, and the women leave, and the women find the food, the women sing to the children at night, the women lie and say it's going to be okay in that other place where we're headed. And I wanted to ask you, you've all written so powerfully about war. Julia, you have the beautiful lines with your son, Yama and Mama, whole cave in some Slavic languages as well. Wonder if you could talk a little bit about what war does to women and why you've chosen to highlight their stories in your poems. Ludmila had that beautiful line about who's going to bury this man. It will probably be a woman, right, who will bury him. And Olga, the beautiful line about these words are undocumented here. Beautiful double sense of undocumented there. Wonder if you could talk about each of you, what war does to women and how you approach that and immortalize that in your verse. Anyone can start.
I think that there are friends in my life who don't like the word woman, and they don't necessarily identify with the gender, right? And who have children. And so the word they use is not mother, but parent. And I have different days, right? One can be gender fluid, and I think I'm mother fluid. Some days I am mother, and I protect my 10-year-old, my one and only child. And some days I am woman who doesn't want to protect him and just wants to sit there and cry and be numb and feel all the emotions. And then there's sort of a parent in me. And that parent wants the son to know his origins and to understand the situation and to be educated by it. And on those days, the parent is the one that has the better discussions with him, that feel rooted in family history and rooted in questions that I don't have final answers to. And I don't think any one of us do. I don't have enough days when I'm parent. That's all I'm going to say about this in the last month. I wish I had more of them where I'm an intellect and a discussant, but it has been very hard. Thank you.
I think women carry the heaviest burden of this war. Somehow, like in my country, the women who I saw, the women in war, they stop being vulnerable. They have to become strong because most of their husbands are at war, and they stay back home with their children. They have to be responsible for the family, for the child's calmness, for the entire house. I have seen many women refugees carrying their kids, and that's what really struck me. It was one of the hardest experiences for me to see those women having 2, 3, sometimes 4, 5 children, the kids and the pets, and they had to be strong and they had to be responsible. And it's interesting, like women somehow they feel also not only the burden of pain, but also the burden of responsibility, like that woman who was with us when we were coming here. It was not like as easy as before, like you take a flight and fly from Odessa to Kiev, from Kiev to Rome. It was a long way, so we had to change buses and cars, and we met, of course, very many women refugees, and one woman who was with us with a 2-year-old child. The child was car sick, and it was a long way, and she kept saying, forgive me, and she was just whispering, and I was wondering to myself, why is she asking forgiveness? And she kept saying to the child, forgive me that I had to take you out of your favorite bed, that I had to put you into this car, that I have to carry you somewhere. This woman did not know where she was going. So she had a friend somewhere in Milano, but she had no idea where she would go. Her husband stayed back home. He had to defend the city, and we began to talk, and she said he does not know many words, and but he knows a new word. I say, how many he knows? She said, Mama, Papa, and the word Bach. Bach is like the sound of the explosion when the bomb explodes. And she said, like, the problem is that he does not want to go out for a walk anymore. He's scared. So this little baby is scared. He cannot talk, but he's already scared. And so this woman, she has to heal the trauma, and at the same time, she's asking the baby for forgiveness. Well, women have to carry a lot during the war.
I'll just say for me, hearing you speak, Ludmila, just the thing that is so devastating is that it's, just history on repeat over and over again. Because when my great-grandmother, who is the matriarch of the family and the reason I write, evacuated Kiev, she evacuated with my 2-month-old grandmother, who was born in April, and Hitler invaded in June of 1941. And she evacuated with 2 young children, 2 sets of aging grandparents, you know, on a train to the Ural Mountains into terrible conditions. And her husband stayed back as a partisan, fought in Kiev, and likely died at Babin Yar, but we don't know. I haven't found his name in any archive. And this is the fate of so many right now in the 21st century. So I don't know what that adds to the discussion, but all that is to say is that right now for me, I am trying to write through it as I raise my two young children. My daughter is 2 and my son is 6, while being open to telling them why mama is crying. My son asks, Mama, ты плачешь из-за Украины? Are you crying because of Ukraine? And I just say, yes, I'm crying because of Ukraine. You know, and he says, are the people still hurting Ukraine? And I say, yes. And he asks why, and we talk about it. And I answer his questions. And that's all we can do is try to be open. I am not trying to shield him from this, because there is no shielding from this. There is just being open with him about it. It is a privilege that he doesn't have to hear these Bachs that you're talking about. So I am not going to take, you know, I'm not going to shield him any more than he's already, you know, privileged to be shielded here.
We all weep for Ukraine at this moment, and I'm so grateful to the 3 of you for the beauty of your words and for sharing those stories. Absolutely heartbreaking story, Ludmila, and one that, of course, we tell, and that's what we do, is tell the stories. And such a powerful thing to be able to do in the midst of so much powerlessness, and so much that happens to us without our doing. The image of the mother begging for forgiveness, as if it were her fault, right? Is such a moving and very, very sad image, but one that needs to be told and needs to be said. And Olga, we talked earlier about, you know, what does poetry do? You know, in the English-speaking world, there seems to be much more anxiety about the fact that poetry makes nothing happen, right? Whereas I think in a lot of cultures, my own, and I know yours as well, these questions are almost not understandable, because poetry is life, poetry is war, poetry is part of how we move through the world. And I wonder if you can give us some perspective on that, on what does poetry do in Ukraine, in Central Europe, in the midst of war?
I think Ludmila is better positioned to answer that particular question, but I just wanted to give an example from one of Ludmila's poems. We're talking so much about motherhood and women as mothers. And one of the questions that comes up for me with gender as a woman is, you know, women who are mothers are supposed to be like these, you know, self-realized women in the traditional understanding. And here's Ludmila's poetry, which is so much about caretaking and care in a beautiful way, and how war perverts that in the poem that Ludmila read, and I read the translation of, these seamstresses who mass produce these sons for war, that fodder for cannons, right? It's awful. It perverts motherhood and it perverts womanhood. But I also see so much domesticity, home, garden, care. And Ludmila, you're not a mother, and yet I see that. And the amazing thing to me is that, you know, you don't have to be a mother, right? In order to write about women as creators, as adorners, as these people who plant flowers and create beauty in the world. And I think that is very much something that I see as a theme in Ludmila's work, and it's something that helps me live right now. Ludmila has been writing poems since the start of this most recent intensification of a very long war. And so much of it has been and I hope we'll get to read the poem, I'm planting flowers. What are you doing up there flying above me with your drones? I am planting rhododendrons. What are you doing, this creation? And so I think what poetry does is it expands that sense of self-actualization with imagery that is so much more, it's different, right? It's different than life, but we are creators in our work of all sorts of stuff. And I think that in that sense, creation and motherhood is not just the job of necessarily women. I think that men can do it just as well, right? And that action of taking care of even a small patch of land during the war, while there are bombs being dropped on your city, is a brave and beautiful act, and so necessary, just to have the reminder that somebody out there, the speaker in this poem, stands there. To me, that is precious. And so I very gratefully pass the baton on to Ludmila. Maybe you can comment about Ukraine.
Thank you.
I
can just say that this part of poetry, which is about like your everyday routine, this is the poetry that is probably at these hard times of the war gives you real kind of peace in your soul, because like you maybe it's like grumbling, it's not yet the time to shout about this war, because the atrocities and the terror of this war, they have been so great, so hard and so serious that probably to add like screams to that and those cries of despair would be just too much. For me, the natural pace of writing during the wartime is just grumbling, just being quietly angry to what's going on, just talking to yourself as if like those bastards, what are they doing to my country? But keep cooking and cleaning and washing something and watering flowers. And somehow that is quite helpful. When the war is over, I think there will be many more cries, and there will be shouting, and there will be lots of tears, and people will just really cry a lot. But probably now it's not time yet. So every poet at this present time chooses the pace. Like I've been dumb for probably maybe 10 days at the very beginning. I like I couldn't speak. I had no words. Like, the words would just fall apart. They were just 4-letter words. Everybody during the war is talking with 4-letter words. Every footage you see, the soldiers, you can hear only those curse words, nothing more. And by and by, the language is coming back to you, and so the breeze is coming back to you. And I do hope it can help somebody else.
Thank you. I would love to hear that poem. I want to give Julia a chance to speak if you have something to say, but I'd love to hear that poem. As you were speaking, I was reminded of Svetlana Alexievich's Secondhand Time, how she ends it with the every woman who says, I don't know anything about what's going on in Moscow. Here, there's some flowers, let me cut some for you. And that's how the book ends. And I was thinking of that as you were talking about the poem, and I would love to hear it. Julia, is there anything you want to add or can add about the role of poetry in Ukrainian culture?
I think we should just hear the poem, but I'll just say I grew up hearing the language. Like, it's just something that is so present in the culture that I grew up with, Pushkin recited to me from when I was a child. So it's not something that you learn in school. It is something that is you are brought up with, right? Just like a flower, you are watered with poetry in Russian language culture, in Ukrainian language culture, I'm sure. So it's just a part of us, I think.
You are watered with poetry. I love that line. Yes, yes. Jose Marti over here. Let's please hear that poem then. I don't know if you want to read it first in English, Olga or Ludmila.
Ludmila, would you like to start with the original this time? I gave people the idea of what it's about. The drones and the rhododendrons.
Окей. Война. День 4. Накануне войны купила рододендроны. Вышла сажать, а над крышей летают дроны. И гудит сирена, и бухает ПВО. Ничего не страшно. Успею посадить. Ничего. Кошка-крошка увеличилась в шерсти от громкого баха, из окна кантата Иоганна Себастьяна Баха. Из-за неба солнце, под небом летают дроны. Некрасивое, чужое, бухает со всех сторон. Ты чья же тварь гремучая, кто стреляет? Это что за лысый Путин войну справляет, словно свадьбу сатанинскую, стыдно, гадко, где рога там и рогатка. Посадила, полила, прищурилась в злое небо. Где б ты ни был, лысый черт, чтоб ты не был, старомодный, отошедший, лукавый дед из прошлого, окурок легавый, для чего мне здесь твои самолеты, твои бомбы, твои рыла, пилоты? Я живу тут, я цветы тут сажаю, и война мне здесь твоя тварь чужая. Я дышала, я ждала, я смотрела, как летели птицы прочь от расстрела. Я еще не знаю, как мне стараться, чтобы сгинули рогатые братцы.
War, Day 4. On the eve of the war, I bought rhododendrons. I went out to plant them. Over our roof, drones. The air raid siren is buzzing, the air defense pounding. It's nothing. I'm not scared. I'll have time to plant. It's nothing. The tiny cat grew big with raised fur from the loud crash. The music pours in from the windows, a cantata by Bach. The sun peeks from the sky, a drone flies, ugly, strange objects thump from every side. What is this rattling beast that shoots and shoots? What bald Putin bro celebrates this war like some satanic marriage? Shame, disgust, someone with horns, someone who needs a slingshot. I planted my plant, watered it, squinted at the evil heaven. Wherever you are, bald demon, I wish you weren't. You old-fashioned, retrograde, cunning narc, grandpa from the past, a cop's used-up cigarette butt. Why the hell would I need your planes? Your bombs, snouts, pilots. I live here. It's here that I plant flowers. And your war in these parts is an odd alien creature. I breathed, I waited, I watched birds flying away from their execution. I still don't know how to try, I suppose, how to get rid of those horned bros.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the poem. I actually wanted to comment on the role of poetry with in something that was published 4 days ago in the Los Angeles Review of Books by Joan Neuberger, who is a professor of Russian literature and culture at the University of Texas, Austin. And this is something she says, and then I wanted to address this question to Ludmila and to Julia. So she is a scholar, as I said, and she says she's been reading all sorts of stuff since this most recent invasion of most Ukrainian cities. And she says, I can't write about this and I can't talk about this. And this relates to what you were saying, Luda. And she says, when I say I can't write about this, I know it's a dodge. It's my job to explain things about Russia and its various incarnations of empire. I know how to do that. I've been doing it for a long time. I consider scholarship to be as necessary as anything humans do. But in this moment, analysis seems to me somehow incomprehensible and profoundly unsatisfying. Then she goes on to say that poetry is the only way to get at what is going on, that poetry gets at the ambiguities and the complexities of what is going on. I am wondering, for you, Ludmila, when you write and when you share your work with other people, how does that process work? Is it a sense of catharsis? Is it a sense of finding a language for the incomprehensible and the difficult? Does it in some ways actually intersect with what you were telling us about spouting obscenities, because obscenities feel like the right thing? Because I hear a little bit of that wonderful, direct, conversational, accusatory, you grandpa, you bald Putin in your work. Does that kind of, how does this process work for you when you write? What is satisfying? And then the same thing for Julia, as somebody who is having a lot of pain, but from afar, a slightly different position. Mm-hmm.
Well, for me to be able to write about things like that, and I have been writing about war predominantly, unfortunately, since 2014. when later my book about war was published, is called To Cross Over the Ditch, the Trench, the Yama, that exactly what we heard today, and it was just reflected. And many of those poems were kind of the poems that already foresaw what's happening now. And when I go back to this book, I'm just scared, because it's exactly what I already kind of knew before. And when it was like, you know, I was able to bring this book together, because it was like looking a little bit aside, standing a little bit apart. When you are right in the tragedy, it's not possible to stay a poet. It's not possible to find appropriate words. So you need some time and space to be a little bit apart, and then just to get from this experience, from what you have suffered, what you know. And like my language is very, I would say, very scarce. I strange, but this is what I feel about. I don't know how to say it. It is simple. I sometimes, when I write the poem, then I can just get rid of the words that I think they're not necessary. They just do some garbage here, and in the end, they just get something very simple as this cup on the table. And probably this is what is most understood, and sometimes quite unexpectedly appealing to people, because when I get their letters and their responses, I see that they understand it, they are with me, they experience very much the same. I sometimes hear from people like, how do you know, or how do you find words that, or that's exactly what I feel. Probably it's my style of writing, I don't know, but like very often when I do things at home and with your little house and garden and your cats, there are so many things you have to do when you get up in the morning, like all women do in Ukraine and probably some other countries, I don't know. And so while doing something, you just whisper to yourself or say something, or as you say, Olga, trying to talk to yourself that you're upset, or just, you know, being angry with somebody, particularly when it is a war. I very often talk to the offenders, like, how dare you? And, you know, somehow it helps to get it out, and the poem gets out with this.
Thank you for that wonderful, genuine, heartfelt response. And Julia, how does that work for you?
I think for me, the poem is twofold. I think one, it has to do a lot with what Ludmila already said. It gets at an emotional truth. It lets you get to the heart of something very affectively, emotionally true, and away, not necessarily away from a factual truth. You're always sticking true to that, but it privileges the emotion. And then the second part is that in the lyric moment, right, in the lyric instant, the expansion of a single thing, as Ludmila was saying, in looking at a single flower that is able to expand into a history of atrocity, a poem is able to collapse temporalities and expand temporalities. And that is the gift, I think, of the poetic form, is that it can let us do so much with time and maneuver time in really magical ways. And I think that's why poetry is such an apt vessel, especially for writing about trauma, because we can look from the present, project backwards and forward, you know, into an imagined and sometimes hopeful future, which I would like to do more of in my work. I'm very bad at being hopeful, but we can all try.
Thank you, Julia. A reminder to everybody that you can ask your questions in the Q&A. We have a question from our director, Rebecca Friedman, to ask, but Olga, I'm interested in your response to your own question. I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well before we go to Dr. Friedman's question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, it has to do with sitting with some things that are quite intense, feelings and memories, and not being able to put them in a structure or form yet. And for a long time, I'm the kind of person whose tendency, which I'm fighting, is to go in circles and think about it a lot, and not being able to sleep, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I'm able to access them and put them in poetic form, I'm able to access those things and change the structure, change the memory, right? It's amazing that something that seems so fixed can actually be rearranged somehow. There is a power and an agency to that. And there is an ability, as Julia pointed with regard to form, to access times and places that are not in the poem, but also layers of meaning. And because poetic language can be so rich, and because it does not name things in the regular way, it creates further spaces to continue for this to continue to become. And when you get back to it, or a slightly different reader gets back to it, they might see something else there. So it's something that both helps me process it and helps it become something else over time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for that. It is poetry, and the language of poetry is so much in opposition to the totalitarian language, right? The totalitarian vernacular. And it does open those spaces of within reality and within time. I think Dr. Friedman's question speaks to this, that you all have touched on the everyday. She says, thank you all so much for sharing your beautiful poems. My question is about the role of the everyday in poetry. Does war inspire the focus on the everyday, or is there something particular about the Russian-Ukrainian everyday? You know, why the particular, why the particular detail?
I think that one of the ways that I think, Ludmila, you use the everyday in some of your poems is with this incredible sense of humor that I associate with Ukraine, and especially with Odessa. And here I have to self-disclose, my father was a humor writer, journalist, satirist, film script writer, et cetera, and we lived in Odessa before we moved to Moscow when I was a child. And my parents were very good friends with the Khersonskys. And so this is all very close to my heart, obviously. And I love the way that you develop that tradition, Luda, when you write about certain things that are very uncomfortable to speak about. And yet by using the humor to do with everyday it's really a very, very delightful. I have one particular poem in mind that I would love for us to read. And that is «На самом же деле, если укрыться одеялом», вот так, с головой. I have the original here if you don't. Would it be okay if we read it? I can share
Yes,
it.
please.
Okay.
I don't have the original.
Okay. If you folks who are hosts could enable my screen sharing, I would be happy to show
But
it.
it's not necessary. I mean, you can just read it in
It's funny.
English.
It's great in the original. Let me see. Okay, let me see. It looks like I can.
Olga, you can screen share now.
Okay, let me try that. Yeah, there we go. All right, I'm going to read the English, and Ludmila, maybe you can read the original. Are you able to see?
Okay.
Big enough to see?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Actually, if you hide under, so this, I should preface this. This was written after 2014 when the war started, but before 2022, right? Because this was in the anthology Words for War.
Right, it is the early poem, yeah.
It's an early poem. So by this time, the Russian troops have invaded Ukraine. Crimea has been annexed, and the region of Donbass has been, fighting has been going on there for a long time. But in a lot of Ukrainian cities, it didn't quite probably feel like war yet, right? So the way I feel this is sort of trying to stave off war. Let's just forget about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. Perhaps not. You can interpret it better than I, for sure. This is sort of one of these incredibly sarcastic poems that I love. Actually, if you hide under a blanket and pull it over your head, then for sure World War II won't come. Instead, lay there, don't breathe, don't let your feet stick out, or if you do, stick one out bit by bit. Or try this helpful trick to stop a war. First, carefully stick out one foot, then the other. Now touch the floor, lay back down, turn to one side, facing the wall, turn your back to the war. Now that it's behind your back, it can thresh and shred, and you just close your eyes, pull the blanket over your head, stock up on bread, and when you just can't deal with caring for peace anymore, tear off some chunks, and when the night comes, eat what you've stored.
Okay, thank you. I like this translation. Do you think I can read it in Russian?
Please.
На самом же деле, если укрыться одеялом вот так с головой, тогда 100% не будет другой мировой. Главное — лежать, не дышать. Не высовывать из-под одеяла ногу. Или высовывать, но понемногу. Иногда можно вот так остановить войну, осторожно высунуть ногу, потом еще одну, потом повернуться на бок лицом к стене, спиной развернуться к войне. Пусть за спиной делает, что попало, нужно только зажмурить глаза, на голову натянуть одеяло, запастись хлебом, и когда мир сторожить станет, совсем не вмочь, отламывать его по кусочку и есть всю ночь. You were absolutely right. There is a sense of humor, like very often. It is there in my poems, like it comes inevitably, even if the poem is very sad, because this is my attitude to life. Like I have to find something touching and nice in every thing, every situation, no matter how tragic it might be. And I remember when I wrote this poem, I remember that I felt actually very sad. I mean, I felt really very bad, and I was experiencing that war from the very beginning of 2014 as if it is right nearby, as if I'm right in the middle of it. And I just tried to somehow to how do I say, to deal with it, you know, to handle it. And this is like a recipe, how you can handle it. It's a simple woman's recipe. Of course, it does not work, but somehow it worked for me because I could sleep better. I remember that cold winter when I wrote this poem. I remember it was heavy snow, and I came out of the house and I looked at all the snow and I said to myself, oh, it's so much snow, so no enemies will be able to come. It will be a quiet night for us and for every other place in Ukraine because there's a lot of snow. So in fact, it's a sad poem with very sad reality, and it is a very true poem. I very seldom invent things, you know. But you're absolutely right. It's just manipulating your legs out of it. It's like getting out of the situation. We all deal with trauma through our lives. We all deal with deaths of someone who we love, with lots of minor tragedies. This is how we live. Sometimes we have to live through the large tragedy, and you have to learn how to manipulate your feet to get out of it and probably to survive.
Thank you. And tear off chunks of peace and store it for eating later. What a beautiful volta, so powerful. And as somebody said in the chat, the story about the woman saying, "Forgive me," has undone me today. So much to think and reflect on, and also so much hope in your words as well. I'm struck by the generosity of your spirits, and I'm grateful for it. We are at 5 o'clock, but we started a little bit late. So if there's somebody who still has a burning question to ask, please drop it into the Q&A for our poets. I'm not really monitoring the chat. So if you have a question, please drop it in. Any closing thoughts from any of you?
I wanted to ask something that's been on my mind a lot. So we left many years ago, and I didn't make the decision. I was 14. I was a very angry teenager. No America for me. Russia was, you know, it was the 90s, and I thought things were very hopeful. I'm gonna take a deep breath now. And Julia, you were in a similar situation as a child. I wanted to ask about gender and leaving home and how that might figure in, or just leaving home. I know for Ludmila, it must have been an extremely difficult decision. And we all introduce you, Ludmila, as the poet from Odessa, the poet of Odessa. It's been 2 weeks since you've been in Italy, or not even?
Well, about 2 weeks.
Yeah, so really recent, and so very hard. And what I wanted to ask about is this kind of, how do we process this? Not so much immigration, right? We hope evacuation, for so many women with children, and just women, because men are not allowed to leave Ukraine right now, men between ages of 18 and 60. And I just wanted to kind of meditate on that, how immigration or evacuation becomes gendered. How you see it, Ludmila, the stories that you know, that you carry in your heart. I know you're a very compassionate person, and what it means for you to leave your home.
Well, actually, this is something that is very hard for me to talk about. I'm not sure we'll be able to describe that, and this is something I push aside all the time. It's like I have closed the door in my brain, in my heart, like closed all emotions, because I know that otherwise I would not have been able to handle on that. All that, if we had to come here during the peaceful time, of course, it would have been different. But just to tell you how we left, I had only one T-shirt in my case. I have lots of some medication which is needed and not needed. I have my documents, I have some money, I have some cosmetics, I have no books, I have no dresses. Like, this is the dress I had to buy here. I didn't have the ties, the pantyhose, and when they just tear apart, because we had to walk that long and so much, I just couldn't buy a pair of the new ones. It was like I didn't have access to the shop at the time, and so I was just walking with those holes on my feet, and that was the first time I felt myself like, I'm not a woman. How can a woman walk like this? But I do not have an extra pair. And I had to lock my door, and I knew that my neighbor would be coming, and she's taking care of my cats. And I know that I will not be able to see my flowers, my tulips, which I used to see them every year coming out. And it's very, very hard for people to leave their homes. And I know that many people already now and before and a week ago, they are returning back homes. I mean, I realize that Europe is flooded with immigrants, and I bet that Europe would only be lucky if those immigrants stay, because Ukrainian immigrants, they are people who will work, who will be great citizens, but they all want to come back. And I am in contact with all my friends, with everybody. And I know people want to be back to their homes. Everybody needs a home. A person needs a home. Every poet needs a home. In the 21st century, it's like this. Before that, the poet probably could wander from one place to another place and be a stranger and wandering. But now a poet can only live in his own home, whatever the country is. My country is Ukraine, and I want to come back home. And I don't want my city to be bombed by Putin's rockets.
And we all hope very, very much that you will be able to come home, and that it happens soon and safely. Blessings to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And to all of the refugees and the people who've been forced to flee, because that's so true. Nobody wants to leave their home.
Absolutely. Julia, I wanted to ask, you have, as a child, you emigrated and you've migrated as an academic and person of several places and cities. Is there a place that you would associate with the word home, whether it's a country or a city or history or concept? What do you consider to be home?
I think that's also a difficult question. It's ever evolving. I think that my parents' decision to leave was not an easy one. They did it for me. They did it because they wanted a better life for me. and they gave up a lot, most everything when they came. And up until very recently, I think they had many questions about their decision. And I think they're very grateful to be here, but they have always really had a lot of questions about the decision to leave. And I associate lots of cities with home. Philadelphia was a home for 8 years, and I really loved that city. And I was there this weekend, and I was running, and there were Ukrainian flags hanging all down the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. And I was sobbing running a half marathon because I felt like my birthplace and a city that has welcomed me and has been home came together. And the DC metro area where I grew up was home because it's where my family is. So every place becomes a kind of home, but I think Ludmila is absolutely right. Everybody needs that home where they can plant their roots and stay and know that they are, held and safe. Even if we wander, we want that one place where we can be safe.
Olga, where is home for you?
Oh, that's going to be my next book. I don't know. I don't, my whole thing has been until very, very, very recently, really, really recently, has been that I haven't felt at home anywhere. I felt so torn away from my roots, and the roots are problematic. I am of 2 places, Ukraine and Russia, and 3 places because my parents are Jewish and couldn't find a home in either of those places. I've definitely found a home in language, but it's very hard. And I feel like translating poems, these brilliant and warm poems by Ludmila, is something that really helps me because it helps sew these shredded things back together. So there's a great deal of love that I feel right now, and pain and loss, but also love, because we've had frequent contacts with folks over there, poets, through Zooms and messages, volunteering. And it's not easy. It's not an easy love, but then leaving wasn't easy either. So I feel like these processes, they're a little bit like bombs. They chop us apart, and we have to kind of heal. And healing can feel a little bit yucky. I wrote a poem. What helps me, what sustains me, is these events and these friendships. And I wrote a poem because Julia actually inspired me a lot a few days ago. And I wanted to write about how we were attempting to send money to Ukraine as an honorarium to one of the poets at a wonderful Zoom reading that we were very lucky to host, Julia and I. Over 800 people attended.
I was one of them.
That's very good. And Ludmila, of course, was one of our stars. This poem is not about Ludmila. That would be very awkward. I will not name the poet because the poem does not, and this is not my place to tell her story, but this is also my story. And the poem is called Poet Honorarium Ukraine, with thanks to Ludmila for having been part of that event, and to Julia for her suggestions. This, speaking about the everyday, a very everyday poem. You don't need to add anything, it's just life happens like this. Poet Honorarium Ukraine. This is my pharmacy in Philadelphia. On the wall, the dingy Western Union phone. Pick it up and someone in Delhi mutters, "May I help you?" This, the need to pay poets for reading their poems on Zoom between air raids. Manisha in Delhi types in the poet's name, which I spell 3 times too loudly. This is love shaped as money. This is the poet in Kyiv, where she fled at the start of the war 8 years ago when she lost her home in Donetsk and the world was asleep. Now, no money transfer app reaches the poet. Apps suspect transfers of love to anyone from Donbass. Western Union then, no apps for us. This is Ken, the cashier. Ken, love, notes that my name is spelled ogre. The transfer request must be restarted. This is the poet texting. Can I do anything for you? In Russian. Yes, Russian, the language of tank tracks and love. My first language. This is my second Western Union call. An AI demands my woo-woo rewards number. and won't let me talk to Manisha. Ken comforts me when I punch a wall. This is my friend, the Zoom co-organizer. Love listening to me wail on the phone. I feel so useless. These are Ukrainian and Russian, sighing and shimmering across continents. This is a picture of hyacinths pushing up in my yard. I sent the poet the picture instead of money. We have snowdrops, she replies. This is my text to her. I am still here when I am 4,753 miles away. This is shame before the poet says, wait, give me the tracking number. This is shame before she confirms, I don't even need the number. Shame, even as she says, all of it is here.
Thank you.
Beautiful way to end our too brief afternoon together. Home, you found in language, Olga, and there is still so much to say about that. So much to say about the language that we find in home. I've found a small, temporary, but love-filled home with all of you today and all of your words. And thank you for that poem. Thank you for your poetry, all of it, so full of light and love and language to sustain us and to carry us forth. Thank you for spending your precious time with us this afternoon. Thank you to all of you who tuned in. They are many, Julia has kindly dropped in many links in the chat for books. Please, a reminder to donate what you can to UNICEF. And we will do this again on May 9th. There will be the second part of this reading. And with that, I thank you all. I don't know if I'm the one closing this out, but I think I am. So both of our sponsors, Dr. Cornelius and Dr. Friedman, say thank you to all of you. Thank you to the poets. Ďakujem pekne, as they say in Slovak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.